I'm going to introduce Robert Kent, who's with the Trust for Public Land, and he's got a fantastic panel that he's going to introduce. And we're going to have a great conversation. So I'm going to get out of the way because I don't know if you've thought about this lately, but bringing park access and equity to all neighborhoods. That's what we're going to talk about, and that's a really important subject. So take it away, Robert.
Well, thank you, Alfreda. And I will first just say it is an honor to get to follow such a wonderful lunch by Cafe Momentum. Also, we're at our own risk. I know everyone's feeling a little tired now. The food's digesting. I hope you drank your coffee. We've got a great panel today. I'll go ahead and introduce them. But first, I want to say a bit about what we're going to talk about. Over the last 10 years, the city of Dallas's park system has really undergone a dramatic transformation. From signature parks like Klyde Warren to new trails like the Northaven Trail, Dallas residents have more options than ever before to play, exercise, and enjoy time together in the outdoors. Today, a full 73% of the city's residents have a park or trail within a 10-minute walk of where they live. That's a 20% improvement in less than a decade. There's still a lot of work to be done, though, to bring park equity for the whole city. There's 368,000 residents and 104,000 children who do not have a park within walking distance of where they live. So on this panel today, we're going to hear from some great leaders who are helping to right that wrong and to really build park equity and make it a reality for all of us. First, we have April Allen, the president of the Southern Gateway Public Green Foundation. She is leading the effort to develop a new park over I-35, directly adjacent to the Dallas Zoo. Next, we have Katie Robbins, the president and CEO of the Hobblesell Foundation, which recently made a $2 million gift to Fair Park in support of the new 11-acre community park that's being built there. And finally, we have Councilmember Jesse Moreno, who is representing Council District 2. He's a former member and vice president of the Dallas Park Board, and he'll be talking to us how things look from the city perspective. So thank you to our panel. I think we're going to go ahead and dive in without having too many more introductions. I'm going to have my first question actually over for April. So the Trust for Public Land, we do a lot of data and research on park access, and I've got our recent park score report here for the city, and I won't bore you with all the numbers except for this one headline stat. We calculated the acreage of parks across the city of Dallas, and we found that communities of color have 1.25 as much park space as neighborhoods that are predominantly white. So that means communities of color, there's actually more park acreage. Why does that not necessarily mean we have park equity in the city of Dallas?
Yeah, can you hear me? Let me try that. How about now? No. Still no. Okay. How about now? Yes. All right. Yeah, I saw that stat and I was intrigued because I do think that equity is the question that we should be asking as it relates to access to parks. So what do those parks look like? What are the amenities at the park? How is the park maintained? I bet that a lot of communities in Southern Dallas, certainly in the communities that surround our park, would beg.
Hello.
How about now? Yes? Hello? Hello? No? Still nothing?
Pass the mic around.
Hello? What am I doing?
Maybe we've lost all our mics.
Hello? 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 Testing.
Jesse's mic works.
Jesse's
Yeah,
works.
we'll just pass the mic that way.
Hello again.
There we go.
Okay, yay! Okay, did you hear any of that answer? All right, let me say that again. So, yeah, that was an interesting stat. I remember reading it and thinking, interesting. I don't know that most people in certainly the communities that surround our project would agree with that. Number one, because I know certainly in the 1 mile radius around our project, there is limited access to parks within walking distance. But also it begs the question, what types of parks? What's the quality of the park? What are the amenities in the park? How is the park maintained? You know, is it a place that families and community members really feel safe going to?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I can think of several parks in Dallas that are technically parks, but you get there and it's a dirt parking lot and some parking bollards and a sign, and that's it. You wouldn't know it's a park at all except that it's mowed every other week. And we have to wonder, does that really living into this park equity? The acreage is there, but what about everything else that makes it a park? So I'm going to actually pivot to Councilmember Moreno now. You've gotten this view up close and personal through the Park Board and now in City Council. Can you talk a bit about how the city determines investments in its parks?
Can y'all hear me a little bit, maybe? Okay. So thank you for your partnership, first of all, with the City of Dallas. The way we do, right now, there is a $3 billion needs inventory for the existing parks that we have in the City of Dallas. A few years ago, it jumped from $2 to $3 billion just because of inflation and everything going on. But the way we select where to invest into our parks is park board members and council members are we get to go out to all our parks. We visit with our neighbors, visit with different communities, friends groups, and we go to those parks and see what the needs inventory is. It's a running list from year after year, and so of course that list has to be updated. But we do try to put in new benches, new water fountains, whatever it is that's missing out there. And so there is a running list committed to each individual park. But the way that gets funded is through discretionary dollars. And so every council member has earmarked money that they can reinvest into parks, into their community. And so that equity part comes in, are we going to choose to invest in roads or parks? So it becomes a tough decision for park board members and council members to prioritize how to use those dollars when it comes to projects that their community wants.
And to follow up on that, we talked earlier about building political will for parks funding. I think about the neighborhood that I live in, over in Forest Hills by the Dallas Arboretum. There's no lack of political will for our parks. We show up and we advocate both with our voices and with our dollars, philanthropic dollars. That's not always the case across the city of Dallas. Can you talk a little bit about how communities can advocate for parks, advocate for more public funding for their parks, and what it takes?
Sure. During our last bond propositions, you were there till about midnight with me advocating for parks. And so it takes people to go out and say, hey, we want better parks, we want stronger parks. We see that a great library, Friends of the Library, is probably the most organized, well-functioned friends group. When I came into the park board, I had one friend group representing the entire city of District 2, rather. And what I did was engaging my community, talking to those different community leaders, HOAs, and saying for them to become engaged so that they could help me advocate for their neighborhood parks.
Thank you. So I'm now going to turn to Katie, and I want to talk about the role that philanthropy plays in supporting parks across the city. First off, the Hopplesville Foundation, like we talked about, is not known as a parks funder, and yet you made a tremendous investment in Fair Park and Fair Park First. Talk about why that was important to the Hopplesville Foundation to make that type of investment.
Yeah, we're not big parks funders or big environmental type funders. I think when a grant proposal comes in, we have to take a more holistic view of the impact that that asset might provide the community in which it's situated. Is it a chance to go upstream on a more healthcare play because it's access to outside physical fitness or in safe ways to walk with your family and kids. I think with Fair Park, it is definitely a civic asset that the foundation's directors were very confident that it needed to happen, and talk about plans that have existed and re-existed over decades and decades in our city. I think plans for the transformation of Fair Park would definitely fall into that category. And I think why we felt confident in making a generous gift is that we felt confident in the leadership of Fair Park First and what work they had done to really engage the Fair Park community into what would be meaningful and impactful to happen in that space. And so it really represented a way for us to increase park equity, and not only for the citizens of Dallas that will use Fair Park on a periodic basis, but for the surrounding communities to provide them access to green space, either through the large community park or some of the gateway parks that are planned for the space.
So we're here at Big Bang. We're talking about impact, and then this panel is about equity. And when I think about parks, I see them as really two sides of the same coin in many ways. April, you have articulated through your work with the Southern Gateway Project the impact that you believe your park will have and the park's going to have in general. Can you elaborate a little bit further about the impact parks have and specifically how that can build a more equitable city?
Yeah, so we call our project a park with a purpose because we are building a beautiful green space that we know the community and regional visitors will enjoy. It will be a gateway to Dallas by virtue of where it is on I-35. But the purpose part of that is the impact that we want to have in the community. And certainly there's some significant economic impact that we hope to have, but we wanted to couple that with equity and center the entire project in equity. And so we were lucky to get a generous grant from Communities Foundation to underwrite our equitable development plan. We took about a year to engage the community in our planning process around how the park will impact them in a variety of ways. So we had upwards of a dozen community meetings, all during the pandemic, so unfortunately all virtual, but we had a lot of engagement with community members around how we can use this park to reflect the history and culture of the area. You know, this was a very historic part of Oak Cliff that was divided when the interstate was built. And so we view this park as an opportunity to reknit the community back together. How can we reflect that unique history in the park? How can we use the park to mitigate health disparities? This is an area that was disproportionately impacted by COVID, has a lot of underlying health statistics that are a challenge. And so, we want to be really intentional about how we can use the park to address those health disparities. We're talking about things like hosting mobile health clinics at the park and thinking about that through our programming. We want the park to be an extension of the school environment. We're surrounded by many DISD schools, including Townview, the #1 school in the nation, and several others. So we wanted to be really intentional about engaging the school community around how the park can be an extension of the school environment, provide things like out-of-school time programming, which we know there's limited access to in Southern Dallas. Economic development is another thing. We know the park will generate economic growth in the surrounding community, but how can we ensure that members of that community participate in that growth? And so we're trying to be really intentional about our diversity contracting approach, as well as building capacity and resiliency among some of the small business owners in the area, and even inviting them into the park to do things like lease some of the space. We're going to have a restaurant retail area. We've intentionally kept it very flexible so that we can offer, options for some of the area business owners. I'm missing a couple. Safety. Diverse housing options. So this is a big issue, and we want to be an advocate of diverse housing in the surrounding community. So we know that that's likely to change as the park is developed, but we want to ensure that we are offering, or at least advocating for, a diversity of housing options. So not all high and not all affordable, but a mix. And we are going to be using our Community Advisory Council to communicate that message to some of the area landowners and sort of view ourselves as a convener of stakeholders in that space. And then finally, safety and security. How can we use the park to ensure that we're improving the safety and security in the surrounding community? So long story short, equity was a very important pillar for us, and we view it as the lens through which we can have the impact that we want to have with this park that goes beyond building the beautiful green space that we'll have.
I really like that answer because I think you articulate the ways that when we are investing in parks, we are having a life cycle of impact that goes all the way from the construction, where you're investing into and putting, hiring minority and locally owned businesses, all the way through residents who might have a better housing option because of that park, which impacts them for 10 or 20 years. And then even looking at the broader health impacts as well. There's a really fascinating body of research that talks about the closer you live to a park, you actually have better health outcomes all the way across the board. There's a study out of the UK that the New York Times wrote about a couple of years ago that found the optimum time you need to spend in nature each day is about 18 minutes. And when you spend at least 18 minutes 18 minutes a day in nature, you're going to have all types of better health impacts and health outcomes. I like that because I think, well, gosh, a 10-minute walk to the park, a 10-minute walk from the park, and some time in the park as well. So you're hitting that 18 minutes right there. But what you just articulated really shows that it's not just we're going to invest $1 in the park today and it'll have impact today, but you're really showing this is actually a lifetime investment that'll have reverberations across generations that can help all these issues that are so important for building equity in the city of Dallas and in communities across the country.
Absolutely. And I think in a larger sense, it also provides an opportunity for us to just build connections in our community. I talk about the fact that I grew up in a neighborhood that had people from different walks of life, different religions, different faiths. I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. And I think that I grew up understanding the benefit of that diversity of experience from people's backgrounds. And we lose that in some of our cities because we live in these bubbles, really. And I think that parks can really be a space where we start to address some of this division that exists in our society and really sort of bring our democracy back together, because we are forced to interact with people who we may not see on a daily basis. And
I'll plug your op-ed. If you didn't see the newspaper 2 weeks ago, there's a series of op-eds about parks, and April had a really wonderful one about how parks can restitch democracy. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I want to pivot back to the council member, and we talked about how the investing in the parks can have impact across generations. Let's talk about programming in parks as well, and the importance that well-programmed parks can have on equity. Last summer, there was a wonderful program for recreation passes that were available to youth across the city of Dallas. Can you talk about that program and then the impact you believe that program had for equity?
Sure. I'm just going to mention one thing, though, on the economy part. For every dollar that the city of Dallas invests in our park, we get in return $7 into the local economy, amongst all the other health factors that were mentioned earlier. So this year, we introduced the All Access Pass, and that was a free pass provided to specifically targeting 12-year-olds to 17-year-olds, because that's always the most difficult group to be able to engage in our recreation system. And this pass was, you really will find out where the divide is, where there's people in certain communities who've never been down to downtown Dallas or to a museum. So annually we do a rec card, and it's usually $5. Typically can provide scholarships. If you look at your water bills, there's usually a pamphlet in there that you can sponsor a swim lesson, you can sponsor an individual to play soccer. But this year we did things a little bit different because of COVID. We knew kids were at home and really needed a place to go aside from the schools that were closed. So we partnered with folks like the Dallas Museum of Art, the Holocaust Museum, our Dallas Zoo, the Arboretum, and basically it was an opportunity to explore the entire city of Dallas that a lot of these kids have never seen before. And this was also done just because of our great partners throughout the city of Dallas, Philanthropies in different organizations. And it just became an opportunity for kids to be able to open their eyes, learn a little bit about history, and just be able to explore our city.
That's wonderful. Katie, so going back to looking at this through the foundation lens, we talked about social determinants of health, we talked about safety and security. Can you talk a little bit about how, perhaps an investment in parks may not be directly $1 invested in healthcare, but you see the health impact of it? Can you explain a little bit more the foundation's thinking along looking at those long-term impacts?
Yeah, specifically for Hoblet-Zell Foundation, we are not programmatic funders. So as we look to determine how we can best engage in fighting some of the inequities in our community and the underinvested communities, we really had to, from a donor intent standpoint, keep it to sort of capital and one-time, non-recurring expenses. So I think, and I'll get to your second question in a minute, but I think for us, what the role, we felt like a role that we could play is to help fund economic development plans, as April mentioned, for her park. We've done that for a couple of other parks to try and help gentrification happen in the right way. We want values to increase. We want the economic impact. We don't want to do that by displacing residents and community members. And then I think stepping back and looking at the park ecosystem, there's many existing parks and trails that have friends groups, but maybe the city doesn't have the capacity to help those connect to each other. And so, helping convene groups to figure out those important connection points and helping those come to life, or building capacity at groups like trust for public land that have that kind of ecosystem view, I think is helpful. And to your question about health, about a quarter of our funding is health. And I think to echo what someone said earlier today, you can only sprinkle money into different, health and wellness clinics. It only gets you so far. And so when you look at, ways to look upstream to help solve problems, parks is one answer, again, providing outside space for people to get out, move around, breathe clean air. So while it's not a direct relationship, I think it's part of, one of the tools in the toolbox to help, elevate the health of our community.
Emily, how are we doing on time? Okay, great. So we'll have one more round of questions. So back to what we were talking about earlier, and this is the stuff that I think is really exciting about parks, restitching democracy. The last 5 years, the last 10 years, heck, the last 50 years of our country have just increasingly divisive. And I also think about we're proceeding, Jim Schutz is going to be talking about his work with the accommodation and thinking about the divisions in our city of where we live, how we live. Talk about, in your view, how parks can help re-stitch us together.
Yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, I do think that we just need more opportunities to interact with people who we may not see on a daily basis. And I think at parks, you have an opportunity to, my son could be playing with someone from, Park Cities, and they don't know that they come from different backgrounds or have different experiences. But, there's just a commonality that comes from being in open space, outdoors, in parks, and I think that we need more opportunities for that in our society. There are some studies that talk about just the increase in civic engagement that comes from people interacting with each other in public spaces, and I think parks are obviously one of the ways that we can do that. And certainly the pandemic demonstrated that, as we go forward, open space, I think will continue to be one of the few spaces where we can feel comfortable, feel safe, and interact in a way that forces us to just interact with people who we don't see on a daily basis. I think, in Oak Cliff, we're really proud of the diversity that we have in our community, and we've kind of figured out how to honor the truth of our history while we learn from each other. And I think we just have an opportunity to demonstrate that at this park when we open it.
And council member, so you're 4 months in, 5 months in. Hopefully you have many, many years ahead of you. When you look back at your time, what do you hope you will have accomplished with the park system through your service on the city council, specifically through that equity lens?
For me, it's going to be connectivity. We have some great parks, some great trails, but it's about knitting those together and making sure we have resources and programs within that. Earlier we talked about, I don't think this is working, so I'll just, we talked about, thank you, our partners and our investors, right? There's a lot of opportunities out there that people want to be able to donate through philanthropy to our park system, but they don't want to necessarily do it through the city of Dallas. So they typically want to go through a nonprofit or a different organization. And so what I want to see is I want to see the parks that we have today. I want to see us reinvest into the community parks that we have today. We have just completed we started our groundbreaking for our downtown parks, the final one, Harwood Park. And so what I want to be able to see next is reinvestment into the existing green spaces that we have today.
Great. And Katie, as you're looking at a lot of these philanthropic leaders across the city, what advice would you have for them if they're thinking about their first philanthropic investment in building park equity for Dallas?
Just say think larger than recreation. I think as the two speakers have elaborated, there's so many more benefits of public green space, and one we haven't touched on is just the reduction of the heat island that we are growing here in Dallas and how warm many of our communities are. Maybe we'll be able to have more democratic conversations if we're not all so hot. But I do think, think beyond recreation. Look at the priorities of your institution as a funder, and you'll likely find something that you're trying to make an impact on is impacted by better green space in our community.
Great. Emily, do we have time for one question from the audience? Okay, is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? Yes.
So I love the concept of equity of parks, and I got somehow a copy of, I think it was from the Texas Trees Foundation. It was a whole study on our community on how to create better green spaces around equity, I'm sure, through trees. And so you were mentioning the Heat Island. I mean, are there nonprofits that are focused on just that? Or do we, where are the nonprofits that we would go to for this kind of?
So I'll repeat the question. She was asking, she's received a publication talking about the urban heat island effect, and then wondering, are there nonprofits that we can invest in that are specifically targeting urban heat island effect? And I'll expand that to broader green space issues across the city. Katie, do you want to?
I'll say Texas Trees Foundation specifically is really focused on the medical district, kind of up and down Harry Hines, reducing the heat island, reducing the temperature, providing safe sidewalks for the individuals that work and are perhaps visiting family members down in the medical district. I'm not sure, Robert, if you want to elaborate on others in this space that.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't point out both April Allen's organization and mine as well with the Trust for Public Land, www.tpl.org/Texas/donate. And there's a number of groups that are doing great work, though. But I would start with the three that we've just mentioned here today.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap. Yes, sir. The question was about the loop trail that's going to connect. It's about 50 miles of trails across the city of Dallas. I'll just say they just broke ground on one of the stretches connecting from White Rock Lake through South Dallas Fair Park and continuing on south to basically the Trinity River Audubon Center. I think that's going to be a really impactful project that's going to expand connectivity for whole parts of the city to connect. Again, shameless self-plug, we're working with the Trust for Public Land on a trail project that will connect from the loop across Oak Cliff along 5 Mile Creek. In fact, a bit of it's going to run right behind Paul Quinn College as well. And more broadly speaking, these trail pieces are important, like the council member said, because it does connect and stitch our city together in ways that go beyond just the automobile. If you can get on a bike, a rollerblade, a scooter, a stroller, just your own 2 feet, it's a new way to experience a city and bring folks together through our trails. So I think that's a really good investment. So I think we're out of time. Thank you all for your attention. Can we get a round of applause for our wonderful panelists?